Temp check. What kind of summer are we having this year? A family road trip summer? A beach bum summer? Or a wake me up when the sun sets summer? With Instacart, choose your own adventure and skip the shopping side quests. Where available, you can get ice cream delivered to your hotel, sunscreen to the pool, or cold brew to your bed. Well, door, in as fast as 30 minutes. Wherever you find yourself this summer, you can get the goods. Download Instacart for free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum $10 per order. Excludes restaurants. Additional terms and fees apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
So this week, we are talking to Natasha Kermani. She is a writer, director, and composer whose latest film, Lucky, is currently playing the festival circuit. She has also written and directed numerous short films, as well as the science fiction feature Imitation Girl. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We're so excited for you to be here. And before we do dig into Lucky, which we both really enjoyed, can you kind of tell us how you got into horror? Is it something that you fell into as a kid, or is it more of an adult thing?
I came to movies really through my father, who's a cinephile, but he is a big baby. So I came to horror much later. Yeah, the farthest he'll go, we watched Alien together, the first Alien movie, and that was like too much for him. So yeah, we watched a few together, and then it was actually a little bit later once I kind of had my own library card and I could go and just rent my own movies that I started deep diving into it. But I found my way, I was also very, very scared. I think I was like a really imaginative kid. So it was actually more the imagery that came to me first. So like I remember being very young and they had like a life-size cutout of Freddy Krueger at the video store at the Blockbuster or whatever. And just like just the image of him haunting my dreams forever. And I didn't see the movie for many, many years. So yeah. Probably what I was making up in my head was like even crazier than the actual movie.
That's something that we've seen a lot with this podcast, is especially people that grew up in the age of like Blockbusters and whatnot. It's like the VHS tapes and all of the like covers that they have on them. Always like, even without seeing the movie, kind of brings up like some kind of mental image of what it's going to be about.
Oh, yeah, because these images are genius, the design of these things, they just really stick in your brain. Discovering all the 80s horror was a lot of fun, and that was more, I think, when I was a teenager. But I think also, this was the beginning of like The Ring came out, and there was sort of like this rebirth of really scary movies, frankly, like actually genuinely terrifying movies. So that just became something that I dared myself to go to the theaters and watch. And I got a little bit more bold, until of course I watched The Strangers by myself and was scarred for life. So but we'll get to that later.
So what were some of your favorites growing up? Like, some of the things that you watched as you like dove into the genre?
Yeah, I mean, I said The Ring, but I really think The Ring like genuinely scared the shit out of me. And I think that yeah, it's terrifying, you know?
Like, I didn't see that movie I had the same situation where like I saw trailers and built it up as something in my head. And I saw the one part where the horse jumps off the ferry and I was like, this movie, and like, that's like not even a scary part, but for some reason I was like, no, absolutely not. And so I didn't watch it forever because it was like this whole thing in my head about what it was. But
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think those movies were really, and I think, it was a lot of adaptations of Korean films and Japanese horror. And so that sort of led me down the path of going and watching the original, right? So like the foreign language Korean originals or whatever. And I just loved that. I think that really opened up the whole world. So I know it's not a specific answer, but I would say
that's awesome.
Following that train of the American remakes back to, again, like Korean horror, was really amazing discovery for me. And then that led to more stuff. So I think it was the time, right, that I got into watching horror movies. And then I would say, honestly, this is so cliche, but The Shining.
I've got my Shining blanket behind me.
Perfect.
So like,
it's perfect.
Terry doesn't really like The Shining. We don't have to talk about that, but I love The Shining. So
that's interesting. We'll have to discuss offline. But I'm a huge Kubrick. I mean, I think I have learned so much from watching his films, and I think it was I consider it one of my favorite horror movies because he shows that he's a master of everything, and to see his mastery in the context of a horror movie, I think was really interesting and inspiring. So, and then I love science fiction. So
yes,
Alien
I can tell.
And Event Horizon actually is one of my favorite movies.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Paul W.S. Anderson. Wow.
Yeah.
I love
She's a
him.
fan.
I'm a fan. Also, I love that you went to the library. Like, I love that. Because I didn't think about that for a long time, about a really good place to get movies, but they have like bomb collections a lot of the time.
Our local library had a really smart, media guy, he was like, he got really great films. And so that they had really expansive sections. And I think I just got spoiled. I discovered so many filmmakers at the library. It was hugely,
that's so cool.
Yeah. Hugely important. So
I love that.
Go to the library.
Yeah, guys, please, seriously, libraries are very crucial and important.
What I also loved talking about the American remakes of like the J-horror and the Korean horror films, because, I do think that a lot of people shit down on like remakes, but like, I'll be honest, seeing Ring for the first time and seeing The Grudge led me down so many different paths of movies that I never would have ever known about. I didn't know anything that there was like Korean horror and J-horror until those movies.
The path goes, right? And so next thing you know, you're watching Old Boy.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what the fuck? Or you find
you're watching Audition and you're watching,
Audition,
Extremes or
Thirst is like one of my most favorite.
Oh my God.
Movies. So
Me
beautiful.
Too. I'm obsessed. Yeah. Oh, it's such a good vampire story.
Yeah,
it's
such
a
beautiful
story.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I steal from it all the time for pitch decks. But but the point is that trail that you find yourself on all starts from the big blockbuster American remake, and then you find your way there if you care, which I did.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Like, it is, I feel like a lot of us got into Japanese horror that way, and so like, the American remake might not be good, but it's opening up doors for so many people, which is amazing, because then more people will watch the amazing like East Asian cinema.
Yeah, it did for me, for sure.
Do you remember your very first horror movie that you ever watched?
I think it was Alien.
Oh, wow. Cool.
I do.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's
the one that I watched with my dad. Yeah. Wow. I'm pretty sure. And I think I was very young, and I think he was thinking of it more as like a science fiction movie and less, because he loves science fiction, but I think he was a little scared. I think he was more scared than I was. Yeah. I think that's early. That was one of the earliest for me. Where you remember, you saw it at an age where you remember less the story and more just like the shapes and the colors and the moments and the feelings. Very, very vivid, for sure.
Yeah. I had the same experience with Alien. It terrified the crap out of me when I saw it as a kid. And because I was expecting science fiction. I was expecting, 1950s with the flying saucers coming down and that kind of stuff. And it's not what you get.
A horror movie. Monster movie.
It's a monster movie.
Yeah. with a bomb ass monster. Like you don't get much better than that.
No, you don't.
Yeah,
really don't.
The scene where the cat is, that scene is just buzzed into my brain forever and ever and ever. Just the jaws coming out,
Yes. So, as an adult, what do you think draws you to horror now?
I'm very interested in theme.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in working in an expressionistic sort of framework.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that genre and horror, and I include science fiction in this. It gives you these really like ultra saturated paint brushes with which to sort of paint your picture. And that's very exciting to me as a filmmaker. I think that I'm very interested in theme, and then I'm very interested in the technical end, right? So how can we kind of use these tools to express what we're trying to say as compared to coming to a story, wanting to recreate life as it is, right? So taking a more expressionistic tack, to tell your story is sort of interesting to me. And I think that's really horror provides you that opportunity to paint in big, bold colors is really fun.
Yeah. We always talk about like how elastic horror can be, because you can like throw it onto anything and you can do things that are more expressive or more like not so much tied to reality. And you can explore themes that otherwise you probably couldn't. And I think that's fascinating.
I grew up on genre. So I'm talking about my dad a lot, but he's a big Star Trek fan. So, not to get off the horror train, but, I think growing up around Star Trek, it was, so clear what they were talking about, but they were talking about it in this way that was really fun and exciting and allowed you to free yourself of the trappings of our contemporary life, right? So, and I think horror does that as well. Like, let's talk about this. Let's look at this. Let's explore this feeling, without needing to be sort of like bogged down by making everything feel like it's a documentary.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. What was the last movie that you watched that really scared you or reminded you of like being scared of horror as a kid, like as an adult? Have you had that experience recently or at all?
Oh my gosh, that brought me back to being a child. Oh man, that's such a good question. I have to say that it's been a long time since I've been scared by a contemporary horror movie. And I hate to say that, but I think unfortunately we're in a place where a lot of the movies are getting made in this sort of like PG space, and they don't want to really scare anybody. I will say I really responded to parts of Invisible Man.
Oh yeah. And
I think that maybe was one of my last theatrical experiences before the pandemic.
Mine too.
It was mine too.
It was a double feature of that and The Lodge. That was my
Oh, interesting. Yeah, The Lodge. I did see The Lodge. Yeah, so that kind of pops into my head as one of the last horror movies I saw in the theater. And that got me. Definitely. That opening sequence, I really felt in it and in her shoes. And that was a lot of fun.
Well, it's another movie that kind of uses horror to like explore the idea of, trauma and like the fact that people don't believe women when they're saying they're being stalked by someone or, that kind of thing. I thought it was really smart in the way that it did that.
Absolutely. And that's really what horror can do. And you call it elevated if you want, whatever. All horror is elevated, So I think that was a fun one for sure. That one got to me.
And also, like you said, when you're talking about like not being scared, I just feel like when you're a horror fan, you become so desensitized. I think like you watch so much of it and there comes to a point where like you like it and but it didn't necessarily scare you, which isn't a bad thing, but it's like, I just sometimes feel very desensitized to certain things that are supposed to be scary.
I know. And I should be careful what I say, but a lot of it is like, frankly, coming from the money people. It's coming from the studios because they want to sell tickets to everybody. And if it's too scary or if it's too edgy, they're not going to do that. And I think you lose that, right? You want the budget, obviously, but what independent horror is able to do is be free and, really be genuinely scary.
Yeah. Well, and that's been awesome. I think not awesome about COVID. I mean, it's been a nightmare, obviously, but I think it's allowed a lot of films that might not have gotten as much attention with the VOD release. That like they'll get a little bit more love. It feels like there aren't huge blockbuster films to kind of get in the way. It's more like, oh, this other cool horror movie came out that's really scary or like really cool or different, and at least they're getting more exposure that way in a way.
Also TV. I mean, I watched, I was totally behind and hadn't seen Haunting of Hill House yet. at the beginning of the pandemic. So at the beginning in March or April or whatever, I sat down and watched, I just binged the whole thing. And
so good.
And it was scary. It was great, you know, and that's TV. It's a different space, you know, so, and he was doing really genuinely scary stuff with that show. So it was cool.
Yeah. And so what are some of your favorite horror movies as an adult? Not necessarily scary, but the ones that you really enjoy watching or you have enjoyed watching.
I mentioned Thirst. I absolutely adore Thirst. I consider it a movie that I go back to quite a bit for inspiration. And I think for me, it really is that perfect balance of an emotionally centered story that's centered around themes and feelings that we all understand, but painted with these big, beautiful, expressionistic colors. It to me really feels like the spiritual child of like German expressionism.
Yeah.
You know, like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Metropolis, these big genre, out there shit that they were doing in the fucking 30s, you know?
I know.
So I love that. And I love those big broad strokes. So I definitely consider Thirst to be one of my favorites. Event Horizon, like I said, I like that a lot.
It's just such a good kind of campy, amazing film.
I actually have gotten really into Clive Barker as an adult.
Love him.
I think it was a little bit too scary for me when I was young. You know, like a preteen, it was just freaked me out too much and it was giving me nightmares. And so I like watched Hellraiser and I was like, it was too much. But then, you know, in college, I sort of went back in and I was reading a lot of his, you know, books of blood and just his, ethos. And so I really enjoyed Clive Barker as an adult.
Yeah.
Have you watched Midnight Meat Train?
Yes. Oh my God.
I love bringing that. Right? It's so funny. I always bring that up because I loved that movie when I was in high school and I wanted all my friends to see it, but they all thought I was trying to make them watch porn. And they were like, what the fuck, Mary Beth? What, Midnight Meat Train? I'm like, I swear to God, it's awful. It's like so gory and gross. And it's just like my favorite.
Kinky gore.
Yeah, here's the funny thing about that. So like, I really wanted to see it because I was a fan of the short story. And so I was trying to convince my friends to go see it. But then it turns out that when it came out, it was put into second run movie theaters. So not only is the name Midnight Meat Train, but it's like in some scary ass theater, in like some dinky theater that's like falling apart. My friends are like, what are you bringing me to go see?
I bet he loved that though. I bet he was all about it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of really interesting, you know, even going down the Cronenberg path, but you know, I always loved, I saw Videodrome and Scanners when I was in high school and really fell in love with the body horror stuff. Obviously The Fly.
Oh yeah, Fly is so
which
good.
Is a perfect movie. So yeah, but I would include like Videodrome.
Cool.
Yeah, I went through my David Lynch phase like everybody else.
Everyone. King David Lynch, though.
Just assume all on this podcast have gone through their David Lynch phase.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Being scared of the man behind the dumpster from Mulholland Drive.
I've actually never seen Mulholland Drive.
Oh,
what?
You need
I know.
Oh my God, it's so
I know.
good.
I know.
We're pausing. Pause the podcast.
All right, I'm gonna go watch it right now.
Go watch Mulholland Drive.
Yes, you have to watch Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, no, I really want to. I don't know why. It's one of those blind spots that, you know, that it's always like, I gotta watch it, and then you're covering films.
It's intimidating. It is like 2.5 hours of
like
something. I don't know what it is, but it's great.
It's great, but it's like, like you said, something. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but it's an experience.
It is quite scary, though. I would qualify Mulholland Drive as a horror adjacent. It's like a nightmare. You're kind of like living through this 2.5 hour nightmare.
Wow.
Great.
That's awesome. So transitioning to your movie that's currently playing in festivals and is coming to Shudder in 2021, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, early 2021.
Can you tell our listeners what Lucky is about?
What is Lucky about? Come on.
Here's the grenade. Have fun. Explain it.
You wrote so beautifully about it. No, Lucky is a satire. I consider it a horror satire that is about a woman who is experiencing a sort of supernatural home invasion. And she goes to the people in her life and in her world, and she's sort of trying to survive and make her way through this increasingly bizarre situation that she finds herself in. And it's great. Bria Grant wrote a very weird script, and she was cool enough to let me jump on board and bring my own weirdness to the
That's what I was kind of curious. How did this all come together with you working with Bria? Because like her script is tight. I think it's really phenomenal, and it seems really personal. And so I was kind of curious how you guys all kind of got together to do this.
Yeah, so the producer sent me the script. I know that Bria had been pitching it not intending to be the lead.
Oh.
So when I read it, she had not really seriously considered playing May. But it was presented to me with her, consider Bria playing the lead. And so when I read it, that's how I saw it. And when I got to, there's sort of a turn into the third act that the movie takes. When I read that part, I sort of put it down and I emailed Bria and I was like, hey, I really want to talk about this, let's chat. And it felt doable. It felt timely, and it felt like something that I could emotionally connect to. And I know that Bria pulled from some personal experiences for the project. And she speaks about that a little bit in when she talks about the project. But for me, it was, I think it was during the Kavanaugh hearings. And so I was feeling a lot of feels, and the script just really spoke to me and felt like, okay, this is something that a lot of people are experiencing right now. And it feels like this is an emotion that we have to have a catharsis. We have to try and get this onto screen, because it is crystal clear. The perspective is 100% there. And it just needed to be actuated, right?
Yeah.
Just bring it to life. It's already halfway there. So.
And that's one of the reasons why I loved it. I watched it last night, and like, Terry and I were talking about this, like subtlety seems to be what people want, like elevated horror, whatever that means, but
it doesn't mean anything.
Y'all just go all out and like hit it over the head in a really awesome way though. Like it's the kind of movie where it's like, you need to fucking watch and pay attention. And I love that about it. Like, I don't know. And especially as someone like who has had like stuff with like trauma, it's just like really refreshing to see that on screen that way and not like kind of alluded to or kind of seen as like a thing you shouldn't really talk about. It's like, no, you should just fucking address trauma and talk about it, because almost every person, and especially women, have it in some degree. So why not address it and how we're all ignored? So yeah.
And that was also something a lot of the department heads, there's a lot of women department heads there. Our stunt coordinator was a woman, and, we had a lot of incredible, wow, English, men on the project as well. But I think that they were immediately interested in, okay, this is somebody else's perspective. I'm here to get my job done and to sort of do what the script needs done. Whereas the women, I think immediately we were like, okay, we got it.
Right.
Understood. Like there's no fucking chit chat. What does it mean? Blah, 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 blah. No, it's about something very specific. So that was beautiful to work that way.
That's amazing.
And one of the things that really jumped out to both of us, because she was texting me while she was watching it last night, and like just the monologue, well, not really a monologue, but the dialogue she has with her agent, where he's like, oh, you're so lucky. And she's like, it's like you could tell. That's where I was like, oh God, this is coming from someplace of like very personal place, because she's like, no, I worked my ass off to be here. And it just, that moment really like resonated with me, where I was just like, yes, I know what you're talking about. I feel this.
I almost cried. I was like,
you feel so seen. It's
like the way Bria's performance and the way it's shot on her face, I just like, that's an amazing moment. And I think it's both very personal and very relatable, especially when you're a writer or in like any kind of creative place. And you're like, oh my God, you're so lucky. And you're like, I hate that word so much.
Yeah, it implies that you didn't work for what you have. And that is so infuriating. And I think that's a lot of people's favorite scene. I love that scene a lot because it is funny. And I think that's the key. And what I loved about Bria's script is that she welcomes the viewer in with humor and satire. And then, you know, by the time you're at the end of the movie, you're like, okay, I understand and I relate to this. And I'm glad that my experience is being reflected, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting journey to take.
And this might also be because like, I'm gay and I love Britney Spears, but like you know, she has that song Lucky, and like, you know, it's always about this girl named Lucky. And like, it's kind of about the same thing about, oh, you know, she's lucky, she lives this charmed life and stuff. And so like when I was going into this movie,
cries when she's home at night.
Oh, she does. When I first started watching the movie, I assumed her name was going to be Lucky, and I thought it was going to be about that. And I was like, okay, so why is this movie called Lucky? And then you start to hear people kind of throw it in little words like Lucky once in a while, but they don't make a big deal about it. But it's that moment where it's like, all right, I see what's going on here.
I love to hear that. I hadn't really talked too much about the title, but that makes so much sense. Absolutely. And I think that was again pulled from Bria's literally police and people telling her, oh, you're so lucky, nothing else happened. Blah, blah, blah,
right.
So it takes a lot of meaning, that word, in the professional context that you were talking about, Mary Beth, but also in the context of being victimized. And could
have been so much worse.
That side of it. Exactly.
I've heard that a couple times, and it's really infuriating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that like also really kind of popped out to both of us is the music. And I know I did some digging, and I know that you are a violinist.
Yes,
right? And a composer. And I know that you were a co-composer, I think, on Imitation Game.
Co-composer on Imitation Girl, yeah.
Girl, that's
a different movie.
That's a different movie.
Yes, I was a co-composer on my first film, and with this, we worked with amazing composer named Jeremy Zuckerman. He's awesome. I want to work with him on everything, and he brought a lot of himself to the project. And again, going back to that idea of being an indie, he was excited at the opportunity to do something different, right? And you know, less money, but you can go ham.
I love his music because even though like I don't think the TV show necessarily worked completely, his music on the Scream TV show,
ridiculous.
That theme song is fucking a banger. So like when I was listening to this, I was like, the music kind of sounds, it has a familiar sound to it. So I was a music nerd growing up. So like I played the saxophone and piano. And so like I am immediately like digging like, who is this guy that's making this music? And I was like, oh, it's the Scream dude. I love his music.
Well, and I just love how it like creeps in a little bit with like the electronic sounds. And I'm like, oh, this is really creepy, but also like gets in your head. And it just captures those like moments where she's kind of looking around before the next violent thing so well. And I love the way it just seems so seamlessly fits with everything going on screen. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. We were cognizant of not making a score that sounded too big because we knew the movie was so small. And so we really wanted it to match. And it was really about creating a very limited sound palette, right? So choosing a few specific instruments and then just working with those colors, if you will, and assigning different sounds to different characters and sort of developing it. So really in the whole film, you hear maybe 4 or 5 instruments at most. I think it's like a cello. There's a violin. Most of the sounds come from a cello. So like banging on the cello, that's the percussive sound.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's super limited. And then, of course, the vocals, which was May's sound. I wanted this sort of like guttural female sound that's associated with her, almost like the sound of choking or not being able to breathe or struggling to speak was sort of the intention there.
I remember watching it for the first time, and immediately the first thing that we notice is that kind of the vocals that you're talking about. And it like unsettles you immediately. So before anything is even happening, it's like, what is going on here? So it like keeps you on the edge through the entire time. And I love how music can do that. I think it's kind of a shame that we've seen a lot of like the big budget movies that don't necessarily have the scores that they would normally have like in the 90s. I remember because I grew up in the 90s and I would own soundtracks to like Titanic or The First Night or like, you know, all of those types of movies that were like these massive scores that were fantastic. And you don't see that as much anymore, or emphasis, I guess, on music, but you do in horror.
Yeah. Yeah. Again,
and that's what I love.
Painting with big, bold colors. And that includes the music, you know?
Yeah.
It's a very expressionistic choice to have big sounds, big music happening. It's the opposite of a naturalistic approach, right? So, yeah.
This is a really awesome, like home invasion / a little bit of a slasher concept. So in taking on that subgenre, what did you, and I guess Bria, because obviously Bria wrote the script, but you and Bria wanted to like add to that subgenre, and like what did you want to do that was that made you guys stand out within that group of
That's
movies?
a really, really good question. I guess we didn't really think that much about the context. We really just were focused on telling the story as it needed to be told. But I think just in the DNA of the film are a lot of other films. So there's like obviously quite a lot of Scream in the movie. Halloween, of course. Actually going back, I mean, discovering Carpenter was huge for me as well. And I think, you know, I saw The Thing first and just was like, whoa, this is fucking cool.
The movie's great.
Anyway, sorry, tangent.
A good one though, a very good one.
Yeah. I dressed up as John Carpenter from the years that he was making Halloween, like 2 Halloweens ago, I think.
Oh my God, really?
Oh, that's such a good specific costume.
I looked like him. I had the mustache. I had the orange, like, pumpkin thing. Anyway, I think we were just really focused on telling the story, right? Like just getting the script to page. And then again, I think just the slasher stuff and all that just came just in the DNA inherently of making a movie that is following the framework of a slasher. And then of course what we're doing within it is different, but
because again, like I feel like there's like a shift in slashers a little bit about, and like home invasion and like more female focused, but this one was really good at like talking about the trauma that comes with, like, you always watch these movies and it ends and you're like, guess she's fine. So it's like a really interesting look at like the trauma of the final girl and the trauma that exists after any kind of traumatic experience.
I will say one very conscious thing we did was specifically about the killer, about the man. And it was a conversation that was born out of, the producer, myself, Bria, the costume designer, the mask designer, where, initially we were talking about big guys, right? Like, so big MMA dudes, a little much more like in the trench coat, Michael Myers type. And then we gravitated away from it logistically at first because Bria herself is quite small. And so it was like, well, if she's fighting this dude off night after night after night, that doesn't really make sense. And then that conversation started rolling. I was like, oh, wow, interesting. What if all the men reflect their women, right? So like there is like a match in that way is very interesting. And so that conversation was born out of that. And he became very slick. The model we used was Mads Mikkelsen from the Hannibal TV show. With like the hair and
I can see that.
I can
see that.
And the coat and then of course the actor integrated that into his performance and we talked a lot about that and so it really was written as much more of like just like a big brutish Michael Myers type. And then he really did evolve into something, in my opinion, much more sinister because he could be a CEO. He could be anyone. A dude at the bar. He could, So that I think is maybe answering your question a little bit. And that was very intentional. And, the designer actually had a great idea. And if people go back and watch the movie again, they may notice that the actually written on the face of the mask, you can see it every once in a blue moon, is the name of the woman that they are chasing.
Oh shit, that's so cool.
So his mask actually says May over the mouth, and it looks like scars or something. But if you look, it does say May.
I didn't even notice that.
The garage, all the different men have different names on there. So that's all born out of that idea that, it is an individual experience. So the movie shows that there's a scope to it and that obviously all these women are battling their men, but that there's always this individual thing and there's no one boogeyman for everyone.
Wow.
So that's so cool.
That garage scene is phenomenal, by the way. And I don't want to get into spoilers too much, but like that garage scene.
Yeah.
I texted Terry, I was like, what's happening? Oh my God. He was like, I'm waiting for you to get to that scene. And I got there and I was like,
yeah, I just get this like text, what? And I was like, yep.
That's the scene. I mean, that's when I put the script down and emailed Bria and I was like, I want to do this movie.
So we talked about Lucky and your career in horror, but Natasha, what movie are we talking about today?
Unfortunately, you guys are forcing me. You're forcing me to relive the trauma of the movie The Strangers.
Who is that?
I don't know.
There's someone out there.
I just want you to run.
This isn't happening. This isn't happening. Why are you doing this to us? gives you a home.
The Strangers, rated R, starts May 30th.
So the synopsis for The Strangers is very simple. A young couple staying in an isolated vacation home are terrorized by 3 unknown assailants. All right. Tell us about how this movie started you. Tell us about the first time you watched it. Oh, yeah. And then I got my Stranger shirt on. Like, we are just full on strangers
rude.
now.
It's really rude. Getting triggered all over the place.
So tell us your horror story about The Strangers.
Yeah. So I was working at a video store in college. Cliche, I know.
No, it's amazing.
And it was one of the last surviving video stores. It must have been like one of the last video stores in Manhattan. But so I was working there and I was sort of making my way through every movie from that place. And you know, I think it had come out the year before or something like that. I remembered it and I had missed it in theaters for some reason. And I remember looking at it and being sort of like not impressed by the imagery because it felt like pretty basic. I was like, oh, whatever. It's a guy with a hood, whatever. I'm not impressed by that. And so I didn't watch it. I kept like kind of passing over it and not picking it up. And then I think, you know, one weekend I had the apartment to myself. So I got a bunch of horror movies and I was just going to watch them. And, you know, I thought to myself, I was like, well, how scary can it be? Liv Tyler's in it, you know, like, what's the worst that can happen? The guy from Felicity is in it. Like, it's going to be fun.
He is.
I have a huge crush on him, by the way, which is the other reason I was
Girl,
like,
same.
we can do a whole nother Scott Speedman podcast. We can talk about Underworld and all that good stuff.
Oh my God.
Werewolf abs.
I'm in forever. But so I was like, Scott Speedman, the nicest Canadian hottie in the world, Team Ben. Yes, so you're the background. I love him so much.
I do too. He's my fave.
Like nothing bad's gonna happen.
No.
But Arwen from Lord of the Rings, like she's delicate and beautiful and powerful. There's no way.
She's gonna be fine. She'll do some elvish runes and everything will be okay. So suffice to say, I was completely unprepared. Like I for some reason didn't read reviews. I just didn't know what I was going into. Anyway, the point is I was alone and I watched it and just I knew I was in for it when the fucking wide shot where she's standing there and the man in the mask shows up and it's like 4 fucking minutes long. And I was like, oh God, I'm going to hate this movie. This is not going to end well.
It is the best shot in cinema history. I don't care what people say. Come for me. It's Terry's background now. It is such
it's kind of reversed, but still.
It's such a good moment. I mean, and it's awful. Like, it's awful. And especially how long you said it's how long it is. And you're like,
just terrible.
He was like screaming at her. You're like, look behind you.
But you also don't. It's like one of those like fear things where it's like, if you don't like know that he's there, are you safe? So like, don't look. But at the same time, bitch, he's right behind you.
Yeah, bitch, turn around. Or don't turn around. Then like the shit go down completely. And we've all been there where we're like, there's somebody behind me for sure. And then
like, do I look or do I just walk slowly away? And
yeah, you walk away, don't acknowledge the creature. So that was horrible. That was completely horrible. And I knew that I was in for it, but I kept watching. But I think then I had my hand on the remote. I was like, after that moment, I was like, oh, Jesus.
Shit's going down.
You know, you lock all the windows. You're like, oh, geez.
Double lock all your doors.
Just everything. But yeah, I think, you know, for me, and this is the experience I'm sure of everybody that watches this movie is it's just so smart the way that he pulls you in with the drama, the relationship drama, and you are just so rooting for this couple. And not just because it's Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman, because they're doing it is such a relatable moment. It's like we've all been in that relationship. We've all been in that moment. It's suddenly just like, whoosh, puts you right into making them so relatable and you're so in their shoes. So when shit starts to go down, you're like, this is happening to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. And like they show you a little bit of background, but they don't try to give you this like exorbitant long history of the couple or like some drama. It's like drama, but it's real. And I think it's really, again, like you said, it's relatable because there isn't a lot of time spent on establishing that relationship, but the time that is spent is like perfectly written to really get you invested in their relationship and be like, okay, I get it. This is not just like black and white breakup. This is like a very complex, nuanced situation that, like you said, a lot of us have dealt with.
Completely. Completely. And then, so then my thought early remember, I'm alone in my apartment, watching this fucked up movie. And then I was like, oh, okay, I get it. It's funny games, right? I was like, oh, okay. So I can handle this. Like, no problem. It's, it's this commentary on society. Cool. No problem. Nope. Bitch, it's a fucking slasher movie. It's got jump scares.
There's no happy ending. Everyone dies, sort of. Like, it's just like there's nothing redeeming in terms of like it getting any better. Like, it just gets progressively worse. Like,
it's just horrible, So then, it ended and I just didn't know what to do with myself and I was horribly upset. And I think I went for a walk. Like, I think I was like, I need to like not be in this place anymore. And I like went for a walk and I thought about the movie some more and I was still upset about it.
It sticks in your head. Like, it is not a movie that leaves your head.
Yeah, not to get too deep, but
no,
I felt like, this, we were talking about The Ring and this sort of like that generation of movies. And we came up in this like post 9/11 horror world where we as a generation accept that like you can do everything right and the sky's still gonna fucking fall on your head and kill you. And I felt like this was one of the first movies I saw that captured that feeling so accurately. So it's not like Hostel or anything that's like in your face, fucked up, torture porn. It's just the feeling of the random cruelty of the universe.
Yes. Okay. I'm so glad you brought this up because this is a huge thing Terry and I wanted to talk about because like this is such a good example of like American nihilism post 9/11 that's not torture porn, but is truly like Brian Bertino has made some exquisitely fucked up films like The Mockingbird is a found footage film that has the same vibe. The Dark and the Wicked has the same vibe.
Which is coming out soon. And man, I don't know if you've seen it, if you managed to see that one in festivals. It like
I'm scared.
It takes a stranger's bleakness and like amps it up to like
worse. It's fucking ridiculous.
Do they leave Scott alone though? Like at least Scott Speedman is in it getting nice.
He's in like a couple towns over, just like throwing some back. Yeah,
he's in a beanie. He's drinking coffee on the stoop.
He's feeling good.
He's great.
But it is so fascinating how it like really is one of the first films that isn't just like the other is attacking, but it's like the domestic space, like where you think you are safe. That shit is not safe. And there's nothing you can do about it. Like you can lock your doors. You can like not answer the doors. You can do everything what you think is right. And you're not going to escape. It gets to you. And it gets to me even now, like the randomness and like the line, because you were home. Like that's the only fucking reason. There's nothing else. And like, what's more terrifying than being like, I guess I could just randomly be targeted by a fucking serial killer today. Like,
right.
Yeah, he says he was very influenced by Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
That was like a big influence. And I think that's probably why the house is all like 70s. So, because it has this real 70s.
Yeah.
That's definitely a choice. Like, that's not how homes looked in 2008.
Right.
So they pass it off, I think, because it's his parents' house or something.
Yeah, it's like their family vacation home or like something like that.
So it's an homage to the awakening, right? America woke up to like, you're not safe in your gated community suburban home. Like they can come and get you at any time.
Right.
But then with that like super cruel early aughts horror movie vibe, it's like combining those two ethos in a really horrible way.
What kind of jumped out at me watching it now, because I haven't revisited this film in quite a few years, watching it for the podcast, I forgot that it opens up with the like based on true events, right? Where it's like they're talking about how there's like 1.4 million violent crimes in America each year and going into it. But like I started realizing, I was thinking back, man, there were a lot of movies in the early 2000s that had that based on a true story moniker. Oh, yeah. And I honestly think that it probably ties into like that post 9/11 fears, because like what's going to scare you, because we have buildings falling down for no apparent reason. So, we'll have movies like Open Water, where it's like people that just missed coming back on a boat. You have like The Conjuring, you have Wolf Creek, people going through like the Australian outback and being set upon by some killer. You have The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Like there's a lot of these movies that were coming out in the early aughts that had that based on true story moniker. It kind of also brings it back to a place of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre back in the 70s that had that kind of like, documentary feel to it in the very beginning, where it's like, this is based on true events. I think that you kind of touched on it a little bit, how like there are, we did have movies like Hostel, and we did have Saw that were like the torture porn that came out of like our fear of Guantanamo Bay and our fear of the idea of torture going on in that time. But then you also had these very nihilistic movies. And I think this one kind of takes the cake of it all.
100%. I agree with that.
By the way, I think Saw has a little bit more to offer.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
So
I think
it gets roped in with like the torture porn stuff a lot,
right.
But I think it actually
No, it's a smart movie. It's
a
more of a
smart
noir.
movie.
It's more of a noir than anything else.
That's true. I just
crime
think it's
mystery.
Yeah, it's just way gorier. It's hard to look past that sometimes.
Yeah, those were tough for me. Those were tough. I could never really get on board with them because I think it was so... I'm a news junkie, and so it was like the idea of exploiting just for the point of exploitation. Like, exploitation's never really been my thing. I'm much more interested in what we're talking about. I was always drawn more to that storytelling.
Going back, Terry, to your point about how it has like that based on a true story thing, I get annoyed by that now. I mean, I get that it really helps with the hype, and it does tie in really well to that whole like the post 9/11 anxieties around cinema. But I think at this point it's a little cheap, but I think it's just now. But I mean, I watched that movie and immediately went home and Googled what it was inspired by. Like, and it was inspired by one time when someone knocked on his door, and like, it was so very basic, like very, very like barely.
I mean, it's a marketing thing, right? But
100%. But it, that kind of stuff still gets people when you Google those kinds of movies. They're like, based on a true story. I want to know more.
But here's the difference is that the actors and the direction in The Strangers is as though it is a real person. So Liv Tyler is playing a real person, a real three-dimensional person, not actually a real person. You know what I mean? A fully three-dimensional character. She has a lot of inner life happening. She has a lot of inner dialogue. You can see her wrestling with that stuff. And again, that's what pays off so well. So based on the true story, whatever, but it does sort of tie you in where you're like, oh, is she a real person? Like, is this a real situation? Yeah. And then the actors bring it to the next level, obviously.
Well, and this kind of like brings it back to, what we were talking about, we kind of briefly touched on a little bit, is the relationship between the two. It feels so real, and it feels so real in multiple different ways. One, it's like it opens up with them sitting at the stoplight, and it's just quiet in the car, and you can tell something has gone down, but you're not really sure what. And then it slowly starts to like evolve throughout it, where it's like, he proposed, they come home and there's petals everywhere, but there's no histrionics. It's not like a shouting match. It's not like, oh my God, I'm getting out of here. And I'm just, it's adult. It feels very like grounded in like a real mature relationship that just, they're not on the same wavelength. And I actually had a friend couple that were like, all of our friends are like, oh gosh, they're perfect for each other. They just got to get married. And he had proposed to her and she was not on the same wavelength. And just to like see that kind of disintegration in them, sort of like, they're with happy people, they've moved on and they've moved with other people and have moved on with their lives. But like seeing that and watching this movie, it's like, it feels more real than most relationships depicted in cinema, I guess.
I completely agree. And I think it actually sets it up perfectly for a horror film because like the most horrible thing that either of them could imagine happened
right
at the top of the movie. Like his worst nightmare happened. Her worst nightmare happened because she clearly loves this guy. Like they're about to get down when the first one happens. So
that was the first sex scene I watched as a parent and I was like, I don't want to talk about it, but I was like with them, but I was like, this is kind of hot, but I also like hate that I'm feeling this while watching this movie. I was like 15 and being like, I'm very confused about what's happening to me right now.
But that's why it's so good. It's because it feels real. It feels real.
It seriously does. Like,
it's not tacky. Like they're not tacky at all. They're not on or fake.
And I think it might be actually her best performance. Like you can see layers of what's going on in her head because like, obviously, I mean, let's be honest, it's Scott fucking Speedman. I mean, he's hot. He seems really nice to her. He seems very caring.
What happened?
Right. I mean, he seems really caring toward her. He seems smart. He doesn't seem to be like a jackass. Like all of their interactions together are very like best friends that happen to also be in love with each other. Seeing her wrestle with this behind the scenes is really smart. And the movie is very quiet. That was the thing that I noticed this time is how quiet everything is.
But those fucking records, like those scenes when the records skip. I could not listen to Joanna Newsom for years after that. Like, I didn't know who she was, but like, I can't remember what the song was, but the one that's playing at the beginning, and her voice became automatically associated with The Strangers, and I could not listen to her for a very long time because I just like
Sprout and the Bean.
Sprout and the Bean, that's right. So that song, I was like, if I ever listen to that song, I get brought back to The Strangers, and I don't want that. And now I really adore her music, but like for a very long time.
Totally. It's pretty iconic for sure.
And like her voice is really like kind of creepy and childlike in a way that is also very cool, but at the time
sounds like a little kid. Yeah.
Like some creepy, no.
Yeah. But to go back to their relationship again, because I think it is important, and not just that they are finally facing like the horror of what their relationship might not be. And then there's like these tiny little clues, because yes, it's Scott Speedman, but there is like a brief moment where we find out that he had lied to her about like a childhood experience, and there's just little things. And then the fact that at first he doesn't fully believe her, right? He's like, you know, there's stuff there. It's all built in and it's very real. And so I think it's multifaceted. We accept it. Yeah, we accept it as being three-dimensional because of that.
So that's interesting that you talked about his character, because I've actually done a lot of thinking about the gender dynamics of this movie, and especially how they relate to post 9/11 gender dynamics, because for some reason this has like really taken up a lot of space in my head, is when Liv Tyler changes from the bridesmaid dress to the flannel and jeans. And so like the entire time that she's fighting back against these people, she is a more masculine looking character. And then she's kind of set against Scott Speedman's character, who he can't load the gun, and like he leaves her, doesn't protect her. Like he's kind of that post 9/11 masculine anxiety of not being able to be a protector and like what that looks like. And then at the end, they put her back in the bridesmaid dress when they're about to kill her, which I think I have thought too much about this because it probably isn't as deep as I think it is, but it is fucking fascinating. Like they took the time to take her out of her clothes and put her in the wedding dress and have them go back to stereotypical roles. And like these people are wearing traditional, like the two women are wearing the pinup doll masks that are very traditionally like feminine. And it's almost like they're trying to restore order in a way to like the way things should be in terms of control, even though they're ultimately killing them. But it's this really last moment of exercising a very odd kind of control over them. The more I've watched this movie so many times, and every time I think more about that. And I think it is really smart in how it plays with that, because it's not very obvious, but I think like with costume changes and some of the subtle things that are done, there's a really interesting commentary about how people feel in terms of like what men should do versus women. And especially because Liv Tyler really, to me, is the main character. Like if you think about it,
for sure.
And like she's able to more like to better defend herself and to better kind of fight back. And he is kind of not an idiot, but like very much like, we're just going to run into things and like, it'll be fine.
Well, he kills his friend.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. That was
dick move.
That was awful. That was one of the most upsetting parts of the movie to me, because I'm just like, I never thought about like your friend coming in accidentally and getting killed, and I'm like, oh my god, this actually could happen. Like this.
And that's when he starts to lose it too. Like that's when he starts to kind of go off the rails.
Yeah.
And what a perfectly that moment, I don't want to derail the conversation from what you're talking about, but that moment is perfectly staged, where it's like it's so the music is playing and then it gets so quiet. And then he just says hello, and it's like boom. And it's a jump scare that like is perfectly tied to the plot of the movie, where it's not extraneous like a cat jumping out. It is like hits you because there is like dead silence, and then it's like boom, and shit just gets real.
Well, and the guy's right behind him too. So like, okay, cool. Like we're just like gonna see another kill, and then it's totally different. And then when they use it against him, like you killed your friend, I was like,
wrote killer on the inside.
Killer. But
I always wondered if they were annoyed about that, though. If they were like, damn,
they're like,
missed opportunity.
Well, they were probably like, oh, cool, we didn't do that one, and we didn't come to kill him, so they could take care of it. Like, we weren't guilty of that.
Right. It was like, never part of the plan, yeah. The other thing about the dress is, again, I think that is maybe another nod to the Helter Skelter.
Oh,
yeah.
The visuals of that, I think, are very intentional.
Okay.
And even like the cut of the dress and like those sort of everything about it. But I wonder if it would be interesting if it was one of the things that was in the script, like from the scripting phase, he wanted that image of like bride and groom. Because he's back in the tux too.
Oh, that's right.
So
He is. You're right.
Exactly. Like it's very much like bride and groom, like man and woman getting married. It's very interesting. And like it feels way too purposeful for it to just be like a random thing.
Yes. I think that was in the original. I think that was always what he was going towards. Because I think he's very interested in like deconstructing that idea of, you know, suburban safety or rural safety or like utopic guy and this perfect girl and all that stuff. So I think that was always the image that the movie's driving towards, you know?
Yeah.
I could see
Which
that.
I hate that last scene. I was just like, fuck you when I watched it for the first time.
It hurts.
That last scene, it's kind of a fuck you to horror movies too, because it's like you normally, I mean, most movies, it's like, you know, they have to survive the night. Like that is like the big thing. It's like, if we can only make it to the daytime, and they open it and it's like bright out, it's daytime. And it's like, this is where the shit's supposed to be like sunny and your rainbows and everything is happy and everything's great. And they're like throwing it open and it's like, nope, this is not good.
Yeah.
And it's the whole like final moments of them pleading, of them asking, why are you doing this? And it's you were home, and it's the intimacy of the stabs that's like countercrossed with like shots of the outside of like normal everyday life happening while this couple is being murdered. That's just like, it's just like, it turns it from like this kind of fun, scary movie to like, oh, this isn't good.
Brian, said you're not going to enjoy this movie and you're going to like it. Like you're going to be really upset and soul crushed and you're going to enjoy it and keep watching it, but you're also going to hate it.
He's correct. He's absolutely
so
correct.
Good at it.
I was talking to my boyfriend's sister, who is not in the industry, and she's not even particularly a horror movie fan, but I was asking her if she had seen this movie. And she had the reaction that most people have, which is like, oh God, I hate that movie, you know? But then we talk about it for half an hour, you know? So, yeah. But she said the thing about the daylight, which I thought was so interesting. She was like, bad things aren't supposed to happen during the day in horror movies, you know? And we don't want to abuse that, those of us in the biz, but it is so true. It's just so shocking when she opens up the windows and it's broad daylight.
Well, so to tie it to your movie, when you have it happen during the daytime, I was like, oh, cool. Like she can chill during the day. Like she can prepare. And then it's not true. I was like,
well, and even like the characters mentioned, it's like, oh, he's not going to come back during the day. Like they even mentioned that. Watching that while watching this movie, it's kind of like a fun counterpoint to it as well. Yes. It's like,
yeah, for sure.
We were very excited you brought up this movie with Lucky because like, oh, there are a lot of cool parallels we could talk about with like home invasion movies.
Yeah,
and, like,
I hadn't even thought of that, but totally, absolutely.
They're obviously very different movies, but just like home invasion and like,
oh, for sure,
it's just really cool.
For sure.
Terry, I want to hear about when you first saw this movie. Like, how old were you? What was your feeling about it?
I saw it in the theaters in 2008, so I would have been, I would have been 27 when I saw this. Yeah, right. Yeah, 27. Mm-hmm. And it terrified the fuck out of me because like I was going in expecting just sort of like a slasher. Like I know that home invasion movies have existed before this movie, but this was like the first time that I ever like really thought about, oh, my home isn't safe. At this point, I'd been out of my parents' house. I'd been living by myself in an apartment for about like maybe 3 or 4 years at this point. I never really thought about how unsafe it really is when you really think about the world and how like because I never really thought about that someone was going to break into my house and try to kill me. I never had that kind of worry because I mean I'm a straight white man in an affable neighborhood. I never really thought about that. And so not straight. Why did I say straight?
I was going to say Terry.
Surprise. Surprise. This is the longest con ever.
This is a really momentous episode, you guys.
First festival,
Mary Beth,
first
there's
video,
something
and Terry.
I've been meaning to tell you. I am straight. Wow.
Brilliant. This movie scared you. It's literally scared you straight.
No, I think I've used that phrase so many different times about straight white men that it just like rolls off the tongue. But
I know, isn't that bad? That's so
it really
bad.
is. But
like bad, but it is so ingrained in your
yeah. But so anyway, gay white man living in an affable neighborhood. How's that? I was closeted at the time. One of the good things was that I really wanted to see this movie because I was so attracted to Scott Speedman because of the Underworld movies.
And Felicity.
I never watched Felicity.
Oh, okay.
I need to though. Like I think he's so adorable. I really do. But it was never really, I never really thought about it until this movie. And I remember leaving the theater and like rushing to my car and driving home and then being like, flipping on all the lights, making sure everything was like locked, making sure my door was like dead bolted in with that little fake chain thing that was going to really solve everything. Yeah. And like, it terrified me. It really did. At 27, seeing it for the first time. What about you, Mary Beth?
Very, 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 very vivid memories of seeing this movie. So it came out 2 days after my birthday. So I saw this with my dad as my 15th birthday celebration because my dad and I had like always watched horror movies together. And like, we were so hyped for this. It was like, your birthday is May 28th. Oh my God, it's going to come out for your birthday. It's going to be the fucking best. So like opening weekend, opening night, packed theater, like so scary. Behind us, teenagers wouldn't shut the fuck up. So my dad did turn around and yell at them, which I was so embarrassed about as a 15-year-old.
No, good on you, Dad.
He did
now
it.
I do it.
And they shut up and it was amazing. Like, now I appreciate that. I was shaking after this movie. Like I was always scared of paranormal and the supernatural, but I had never thought about people as monsters at that point and like serial killers and murderers. And then this like absolutely changed my like worldview about that. And we got out to the parking garage and I sprinted to my dad's car, like almost crying. I was like, ah! And so we ran to the car and then my dad and I just sat in his living room with all the lights on. Like he was terrified too. We were just kind of sitting there quietly, just like, so what do we do now? And so like, I couldn't sleep that night. And my dad was in an apartment. So like, it wasn't as scary, but then all I could think about was how they could get into the apartment. Mm-hmm. And so I also have OCD. So sometimes my OCD, the way it manifests is it takes those things like very, very, very far. And so that was very strange.
Thinking about it. Yeah.
Yes. Like thinking about it and just like this movie still gets into my head when I'm home alone. Now it's not as bad, obviously, but like I was babysitting my cousins at my aunt's house in the woods a couple weeks ago. And all I could think about was like her mask coming out of the woods. This movie has also scarred me for life. Like it will never leave my brain, but it's also one of my favorite horror movies. But like I saw it at 15 in the theater. Like it was just.
Well, you're like scared of looking at dark windows because you know that the mask is going to come, right. It's like, fuck.
Exactly. Oh my God. It's like amazing how much that movie had destroyed me. And I think what angered me a lot was when I was 15, I put a lot of energy into Rotten Tomatoes and I was very much invested in Rotten Tomatoes scores. Thankfully, I have changed. But I was so mad. This was the first instance of seeing the Rotten Tomatoes scores and being really pissed.
Was it bad? I don't know what the story is.
I think it's at right now it's at 48%. I don't think it's
not
fresh.
Terrible, but it's rotten.
But it's not
and
fresh.
I was so mad because I was like, this is the fucking scariest movie I've ever seen. Like, how could people say it's boring? How could people say it's not worth your time? Like I think that was one of the first moments when I realized that sometimes critics are wrong and like they don't always have your best interest at heart, particularly when it comes to genre. Mm-hmm. So I would remember like always defending that movie and people were like, oh, it's like people would say it was stupid. I'm like, what is stupid about this? Like, what is stupid? And I think people just don't want to be scared of it. I think they just want to like pretend that it's not scary and say it's dumb. And my dad brought up a good point where he's like, there's no explanation. And that this is one of those first times where like, there's not an explanation. So people were probably pissed. They were like, what do you mean? Yeah. Because we were home. And I think it like, we've talked about, I think it really did spur like a movement in film with that, like American nihilism that people were not like, we're not ready for. And we're like, we want to go to the movies for escapism. And Brian Bertino said,
nope.
No.
Here's some reality for you hoes.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you feel a real sense of loss at the end of the movie. Like you feel sad. It's not like you feel scared for sure and freaked out, but you feel like you've lost something.
Yeah.
Perhaps your innocence.
Right. I think one of the things that works really well is this idea of the mask, because like I remember the marketing really focused on the burlap sack, and I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be another Freddy, another Jason, another Michael Myers, some kind of like almost supernatural entity that's just going to be, slashing and killing, and it's going to be kind of fun. But it's not that movie. And it uses that kind of trademark of the slasher genre and of the masks and just kind of obliterates all the kind of like mythology behind it, because at the very end they take off the mask and they're like, this is us. The audience isn't going to see us, but you are, and we're regular people.
That's when your heart sinks into your stomach, when they don't recognize them.
Right.
Right. And they're just like, yep, they're just random ass people. It's like,
yeah.
They're also, when I was reading about the making of, like, the strangers try to stay away from the other cast members as much as possible to
really?
like create that kind of tension between them. And so I thought that was interesting that like they tried to stay away because they wanted to maintain that kind of weird energy between like themselves and Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman. So that was really cool. And it worked. I mean, I don't know if it helped, but it sure didn't hurt.
No. You know, the scene that I think is one of the best scenes. I loved watching this second time that I've seen this in like, I don't know how many years, but just the iconic shot. It's everything from the moment that you see him behind her to her walking through the house, her throwing open the blinds, and like the mask is there staring at her. And she falls over, she knocks the record starts skipping, the axe is coming through the door, the lady is trying to break into the house. Like it's madness. It turns into this like insane moment of like, what do you do? And she's trying to hide under the bed. She doesn't fit. She shatters the lamp. Like all of this moment, it's like this huge moment of complete and utter anxiety and tension of like, what the fuck would you do in this situation?
I love Liv Tyler's scream too. Like her ability to like capture that kind of like primal absolute terror is like,
she's a good scream queen.
She's a good scream queen. We should talk more about Liv Tyler as a scream queen. I think
she's great.
She's so good.
She's just so damn likable. Both of them are, you know, and like, that's what's so evil about the movie, for sure. And the other thing that's evil about it, it's not a slasher, like you were saying. It's not like a Freddy or whatever with a crazy backstory. But it's also doesn't justify anything, because I think that's why I brought up Funny Games, where it's like, oh, the director's trying to make a statement. Like we're talking about the family unit or whatever, but there's no resolution to their relationship either.
No.
So it's just total nihilism from start to finish. And there's no nothing falls into place.
No. And it's one thing that I've noticed is doing this for this last year, talking to people about, you know, the movies that scared them. And there's a lot of like movies from the 80s and whatnot. You know, you have like Poltergeist, where they build houses over the burial grounds, or you have like The Ring, where someone watched a cursed tape, or Fright Night, where a vampire moves in next door and you're snooping on them. You know, there's all these like cause and effect, and there's no cause and effect to this. It is just, you went home after having a party and it was the wrong night. There is nothing that you could have done that would have changed the plot of this.
Like even if they had gotten engaged, like it would have been the same exact thing.
Exactly.
Like it doesn't matter if you had the happy ending. Like they don't give a shit about a happy ending. Like
and how obsessed we are with our own lives, right? You're like so wrapped up in the way that we're wrapped up in their relationship for the first 5-10 minutes of the movie, is how we're all moving through our lives, you know, in our own thing, not understanding or not accepting that there is this dark underbelly to what we're doing, right? And then Donald Trump gets elected, but
right, exactly.
You know, like we're paying attention to our own lives, and we're not always thinking about, you know, the big stuff.
Piggybacking a little bit on what you said about that we're so caught up in their internal, like the lives that they're dealing with, they don't realize the issues that are popping up immediately. Like, for instance, when the girl knocks on the door and the light is out and he's like flipping it and he's like, oh, the light's not working. And she's like, is Tamara home? That line just for some reason just like is freaky, even though it's like something so benign. Yeah.
She's so good. Like it's
really,
like you said, it's the one line, but now the name Tamara will forever make me want to run the opposite direction.
Yeah.
But they completely like, well, that was weird. Like they just sort of write it off because they're so enwrapped in the fact that they think that their lives are like collapsing.
Their drama,
that they completely miss the fact that this lady is not right, and she obviously unscrewed that light and she doesn't want to be seen. And it's all these little moments that are leading up to the big reveal of when she pulls back the drapes and the sliding door and the man is there. That's like, you would think that someone would realize how kind of creepy the situation is before you got to that point, but they're so enraptured in their own little life falling apart.
I think it's totally believable.
Oh, it is.
I totally accept it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like my favorite part of that was when she walks away and says, "See you later."
Yes.
And Liv Tyler's like, that was weird.
Can we call someone? Like, is she cool? Like, they weren't even worried about themselves. Like, is she?
They're worried about her.
Yeah, I was like, is she cool? And I'm like, no, she's not, but not for the reasons you think. But to see you later is just like the best foreshadowing ever. It's just to see you later line.
But it's the movie posits an impossible situation, which is be on alert all the time. And this is the curse of our fucking generation.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you be on alert. The world wants nothing to do with you. The universe is unkind.
Right.
And yet also live your life and get married and have kids and do the whole 9 yards. What the fuck?
They'll be ever vigilant 100% of the time.
How the fuck are we supposed to reconcile those two things?
And like, if something happens to you, tying it in with Lucky, it's all your fault. Or like, what could you have done differently?
What did you do wrong?
Or you're lucky that it didn't get worse.
Yeah, like it's so true where it's like, why aren't you protecting yourself all the time, but why aren't you also having fun? And I'm just like, we can't do it all. It's just not, it's impossible. I don't know how to exist.
It's an impossible situation. And I think the movie distills that, right? And it's like, no, you're just going to die. Like, that's it. You're over.
And watching it this time brought me back to when I first saw it, because like at that time, post 9/11, when all of a sudden everything was a breaking story, it was the news, like 24 cycle, like it existed before that a little bit, but like everyone was all of a sudden keyed into the news because of everything that 9/11 taught us, that new things were going to be coming in and you don't want to miss this next thing that's going to happen. We have chyrons on the bottom of the screen. We have these scrolling bars. We have everything telling you breaking news. You got to be worried. You got to be focused on this. And it still happens till today, but you see all of that and you're like trying to reconcile, like you said, having a career, having a life, getting married or whatever the case may be, while you're having to contend with, be vigilant, always be worried, something's going to happen. It could happen tomorrow. And so you kind of forget those things. And this is what that movie kind of ties into.
And that's true horror. Like that is true. That's true terror that we're talking about. I think that's what this movie is tapping into. I think there's also a degree of like sins of the father, right? Like sins of the past. By that, I mean, again, the fact that he was inspired by this thing from the 70s.
Right.
That hasn't been resolved. Right. So it's like, these people are still fucking crazy. They still want ultra violence. This is what they want. And it's a part of our society that we haven't addressed or fixed. And you could be next, you know? And I think that's really interesting as well. And we understand the cyclical nature of violence, specifically in our society, right? Like if we revel in it, if we make money off of it, if it's all that kind of stuff, then it's part of our society. And then some unlucky fuckers are going to get stuck in the middle of it, you know? And I think that's why it's so scary. That's why you feel so sad at the end of this movie, because it feels so fucking real. Yeah. Dark.
Going with going with the ending of the movie, though, the last scene of them driving away with the Mormon kids, and they're like, can I have one of these? And he's asking like, are you a sinner? And she's like, sometimes. What? It's
so evil.
I don't even know what to say about that. And then they're driving away and there's like, it'll be easier next time. You just told these kids, sometimes I'm a sinner, but then it's like, next time it'll be easier.
Yep. It builds this giant world and you wonder how many of them there are, right? Like, is this a cult with like tons and tons of people? Is it just these 3 people? And again, I really think that's the homage to that 70s thing. I think that's a pretty like explicit nod to the Manson family. Yeah. But it is because the movie says maybe you're next. Right. That's basically what the movie's saying. They're like, well, next time it'll be easier. So who's next?
Right. Well, speaking of who's next, have you seen the sequel?
I have not. I was actually thinking, have you guys seen it? Is it?
No, I haven't seen it.
It's fun.
I was worried. I was worried it wouldn't live up to the expectation.
It's not the same movie. It's more of like a slasher. It has a really cool sequence at a pool that everyone talks about. That's like really kind of cool. But
I've seen that sequence. I've seen that. Yeah. I haven't seen the whole movie.
That's the thing that everyone talks about. It's like, oh my gosh, the pool sequence, which is good. It's well filmed, but I'm like, I don't think like it's a fun movie. I don't think that it really necessarily fits in with the feeling of what Brian was going for in his film.
So I heard that it was the studio who wanted sequel rights, so that's why she's not dead at the end. It's like had that kind of dumb ending.
Yeah,
I heard that was in the original script. They're both dead, and that's it. but because they wanted to do
It
sequels.
would have been better. But I mean, again, I was like, oh, there's going to be a sequel. And then I never watched it because I was like, there's just no way.
It's a well-made film. It's just not, it's a completely different movie. It's a completely different kind of feel to it. It feels more like an 80s style slasher movie than it does so I mean, it's good for what it is. It's just not, in my opinion, it's not what Brian was trying to set out to do with his story.
And it's the intimacy that is so devastating about The Strangers.
Yeah.
And without that, I also think it's that perfect, I really do think the casting director nailed it. Like it's that balance of the two of them, their chemistry. I don't know if you can catch lightning in a bottle twice with that, but they're going to try.
They're going to try. So do we want to wrap up and give our final thoughts on The Strangers?
Sounds great.
Cool. So Terry, how many burlap sack masks out of 5 do you give The Strangers?
Rewatching this movie, and again, it's probably been, I don't know, 5 or 6 years since I've seen it. I think it's pretty much a masterpiece of terror. I think it's everything that we've talked about, from even the stuff that we haven't talked about, like the warmth of the movie. The movie is really a warm filmed movie. There's a contrast between like the dark spaces that are really cold, and then it's like these light fixtures that give this feeling of warmth, and sort of like going back to what we talked about, that 1970s style, like kind of like family feel to it, that just play so well together. And I think it's perfectly cast. I think it is perfectly executed. I gotta say, I honestly, I think rewatching it this time, I'm going to give it 5 burlap sack masks out of 5, because I think for what it's trying to do and what it's setting out to do, it nails it perfectly, from tone to execution to the final bone chilling moment that still gets me when she gets stabbed in her stomach and her cry and her face. Just like from that moment, I'm just like, oh God. It's more horrifying than any torture porn film could be, because it feels real and it feels grounded in the characters. Yeah. So that's me. What about you, Mary Beth?
I mean, no shocker here. 5 burlap sack masks out of 5. Not just because it is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, but for a lot of the same reasons you said, Terry. It is just so well made, and it's just like, you know, looking back on it now, like I don't understand why more people didn't love it. And it's just, I also love Brian Bertino. I think he really has a very specific vision, and it's really nihilistic, but I also really like that. I think he's very clear in what he wants to create, and he doesn't really want to make anyone happy. He's not trying to conform to like the typical horror ending. And I think I just really appreciate that. And that was, again, my first introduction to like that kind of ending, and it just really spurred an interest in me in a lot more really kind of dark movies. So yeah, it's just, I mean, classic Criterion Collection version of The Strangers. Please and thank you. So Natasha, you have the final word. How many burlap sack masks out of 5 do you give The Strangers?
I am also going to do 5 out of 5 burlap sack mask.
Did not realize how hard that was going to be. I was like, oops, picked a really complicated thing that should not be such a tongue twister, but here we are.
Yeah, for scarring me for life, it gets 5 masks. And I think just capturing a sense of true existential dread that leaves you like feeling completely empty inside. And you can't really shake it for a few days. So thank you for forcing me to relive that horrible feeling.
You're welcome. That's what we love to do.
It's like therapy for fun.
Yeah. No. Here we are. Saying hi. Well, thank you so much, Natasha, for joining us to talk about The Strangers. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up you'd like to share?
I am pretty low profile on social media. I'm on Instagram. You can find me, Nata Kerm. First 4 letters, both my names. I mostly post pictures of my dog and political nonsense that nobody wants to hear from me. And memes from Phantom Thread.
Love it.
Coming up next, Lucky. Yeah, just check it out.
Hell yeah. So listeners, both of the podcast and of Frightening Ass Film Festival, you have heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with The Strangers? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out directly to us on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, make sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Steve Arnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for watching or listening. Stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the children. Somebody please think of the children. Somebody please think of the children.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.